the cells themselves in terms of the myelin sheaths. So we're seeing all these things that are happening that is at least the biological underpinnings for depression. And the other thing you heard me stress last night was the whole issue of inflammation. And the two reasons that I was really pressing those issues is because there are many ways to address those, many type of treatment options to address that. And it's not just a matter of looking at medications. And I can tell you, people come to me when they're evaluated, and what they're looking for is medication. And it may be appropriate, but there's a other whole host, if you will, of treatment options that they do need to consider. Okay. So we're going to talk about sleep tonight. There we go. And so you can see in depression, it's the classical target symptom that I ask them. Can you tell me how much you're sleeping? How do you get to sleep? Do you stay asleep, or are you waking up early in the morning? And you can see here that this is a major target symptom that we look at. And I'll have them measure that so I can see if there's changes in the treatments that we're providing. This is the opposite, hypersomnia. This is insomnia, hyperinsomnia, prolonged nighttime sleep episodes, and daytime fatigue and sleepiness. Actually, I saw a patient I'm treating today who has, she has obstructive sleep apnea. You've heard about that, right? You know, in terms of the mechanics of breathing at nighttime. Well, she has daytime sleep apnea. Not apnea, she has daytime sleep problem. She fell asleep at work, she told me, and her supervisor saw her. And so I have her on a med, and I adjusted that med. She is responding to that med, thankfully. But that can cause a lot of problems. Can you imagine if you're driving down in a car or operating some machinery, and you start to fall asleep? Another term for that, it's another whole diagnosis as far as called narcolepsy and cataplexy, okay? I'm not going to get into that. But as I said, it really precedes a depressive episode, and there are consequences to that. Whoops. Okay. You guys got that? Good. So this is a sleep cycle, huh? And here do we got? We got 1 stage, 2 stage, 3 stage, 4 stage. And what do you notice about the stages? They get shallower. They get shallower. So they get abbreviated, huh? And I'm not going to go down into the specifics, but you hear going down into a deep sleep. And has anybody, you don't have to raise your hand, but has anybody ever had a sleep study? Huh? They actually have take-home sleep studies as well. And what they're measuring is these EEG waves. You know what an EEG is, an electroencephalograph. If you have seizures, put these nodes, leads on your head, and we can measure electricity in your brain. And they look at this, whether there's appropriate number of sleep spindles and K symbols, slow waves, and then really, really slow waves. And then you come up out of that, and this is called rapid eye movement. And you know what rapid eye movement is, don't you? Huh? What's happening during that time? Dreaming. You're dreaming, okay? And if you want to remember your dreams, you must have your mind, which is different than your brain, okay? Your mind and brain are two different things. Your brain is there for you to tell it what you want from it. And if you don't tell your brain what you want from it, guess what? It's going to do what it wants. Okay, it's somewhat programmed. I'm not going to get into how it's programmed. But you have to tell it, say, gee, I'd like John to remember my dreams. Okay? Can you help me to remember my dreams, brain? Okay? The likelihood of you remembering your dreams is greater. And then we go down again, we come up, we go down, and you can see the cycles, if you will, shortened and abbreviated. And what also happens, as I was mentioning earlier was they also condense, and we don't have as many cycles that we go through as we get older, okay? What do you think happens in our sleep? Okay. You know how close you are next to death when you're sleeping? This close. You're this close next to death. Your body shuts down, okay? There's certain neurotransmitters I won't get into. Slow down, there's other ones that come up, but your breathing slows down, your muscle, you go into a stage of sleep. And have you ever experienced that where you're in that real pre-awakening state when you really can't even formulate an idea and you can't move your body? Pretty scary. Pretty scary. You know, I've experienced that. And you can't move your body. You know, you just cannot move your body. Pretty scary. But you're condensing a lot of information that you have experienced during the daytime. You got these little L's, if you will, Kathy, that are they're storing information. They're putting them in the proper cubby holes, what have you. So if you've been, say, during the week been worrying about, let's say you're worrying about paying your taxes, property taxes are coming, you got your feds, your state taxes are coming, you're worrying. There's a theme of worrying there, right? Do you know what'll happen in your dream state? You'll dream something like that, okay? I know when I'm worrying, Greg, is I have the dream, and I kid you not, I'm in the second year of high school at Central Catholic High School in Lawrence, and it's near graduation time to go to the next grade. And I have 2 book reports, and I haven't read the books, and I haven't done them. So what does that tell you? I'm worrying. And our dream state really is a reflection of our daily waking state. Doesn't that make sense? And yet people have made a lot of money by being able to interpret your dreams and what have you. It's pretty basic. It's not too hard. Oops. Okay. I'm not going to get into a lot of this here and complicate this, but here again, we're right into the middle of the brain. We got looking at this right in this area, okay? It's called the preoptic area, and there are mammillary bodies there, and there are other essential ganglion bunches of neurons and what have you. And this is very important for sleep in terms of waking you up and in terms of putting you back down. You are, if you will, programmed to follow a certain cycle, okay? Your cortisol levels coming out of your pituitary gland, out of your adrenal gland, they're coming up at around 5 o'clock in the morning, and around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're decreasing. So you have a sleep-wake cycle, huh? And, the Lord did that in terms of creating, started the day with the evening, and he finished the day in the light. And he said, that was all good, huh? And there was a cycle to it, isn't there? There is a cycle. There is a cycle, as I told you, to sleep. And these neurotransmitters here are, so to speak, your little Swiss clocks that let you get tired and go to sleep. And then there are other little clocks that are going to wake you up. And I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but there's this one called orexin, okay? And this is a waking, if you will, hormone that will click this area of the locus coeruleus, and this is the mammillary bodies, and another area called the raphe nuclei. Don't worry about all of those. But it is basically primary one that says, oh, it's time to wake up. You got to wake up. Come on, you got to go to work, if you will. Then there's these over here in an area of the brain that says, oh, we're going to block this. And if we block this, we're going to be going to sleep. So we're beautifully and wonderfully made in terms of our hormonal and neurotransmitter makeup. It's just amazing how we're able to function. And it's all been programmed And what I mean by program, it's a creative process. It's all been built into us, okay? If it's been built into us and we begin to recognize those patterns, should we not then follow those patterns? Oh, oh, so John here doesn't, he's going along, he sees that octagon red sign. He doesn't stop. Huh? He only stops when he sees a green light. We should pay attention to this, okay? I'm going to talk about that in terms of some of the treatment issues as well, as far as how we can take care of ourselves, good brain maintenance, if you will. And there are a lot of consequences when we don't sleep. Let's skip that. Okay. You got that okay? Am I okay here, Kevin? You're doing good. Good. Okay, good. There are a lot of consequences to not sleeping. As I said, this is a real tip-off, if you will. When people aren't sleeping, if they're depressed, I look at that all the time, and that's something I track. I had a patient today who had manic depressive illness, and when they're starting to go up into a hypomania and they're getting really a lot of energy, they're feeling elated and what have you, first thing that goes out the window is sleep. And the first thing I asked this gentleman, I said, tell me about your sleep in the past 2 weeks. I want to know how you're sleeping. And I said, you should be very aware of, if you're not sleeping, okay, that tells me you're possibly going to be going into a mania. And after a manic episode, people then go into a crash, a depression, okay? So if you have a heart attack and what have you, that's going to interfere with your sleep, hypertension. Look at one of the causes of absenteeism, productivity, okay? Just your motor movements, your ability to drive a car, work with power equipment or whatever it is, your productivity will be reduced because your ideas and your ability to act that out in an action is decreased, if you will. And sleep will add to that. Medication misuse. We'll talk a little about that tonight, about the use of medications. People will start saying, well, I took this over-the-counter medication. I said, oh, what were you taking? Oh, I took some NyQuil and I took some Benadryl. I said, oh.
And they slept.
Huh?
And they slept.
And they couldn't get up.
What a shock.
They couldn't get up. And the 67-year-old female came to me because she was getting confused. And so I wanted to know the list of her medications. Yes, taking NyQuil and taking Benadryl. Well, it has it has an ingredient called anticholinergic, okay, anticholinergic chemical. And guess what that does? Remember that I talked about that hippopotamus that's in your brain, huh? And that's for learning? I told you that has to do with choline that's in the brain. Anti means it's knocking that out. So she's becoming confused because she's taking the Benadryl and the NyQuil, which has an anticholinergic in it, if you follow me, that's knocking out a transmitter in the brain that's so helpful for being clear in your thinking, being able to access information, okay? So be very careful when you're using over-the-counter medications. And what's this here? Alcohol. I have a lot of people that will tell me, oh yeah, I have 2 glasses of wine. It helps me settle in for the night. You know, I have a shot of bourbon and what have you. In the long run, alcohol, I'll just say this, those 2 hippopotamus that are in your brain over here, they only have 3 layers of granular cells. And ethanol, which is alcohol destroys cells. I don't care if you drink wine. I don't care what the Italians say. I don't care what the Mediterraneans say. When you drink alcohol, you're destroying neurons in your brain. Period. Period. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. That's what the studies show. Oh.
He said that's how we ended up with 2.
Oh, I see.
When you asked yesterday, he killed off the others.
I see. then clearly, look at caffeine. Do you know how long caffeine lasts in your body? Okay, we call it a half-life. So say if you take a cup of coffee at, let's say at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's 100% potent. At 8 p.m. or 9 o'clock p.m. in the evening, it's 50% potent. So it's still working. Caffeine is a drug. It is a drug, okay? No doubt about it. The other thing there too is what we see is people using stimulants, okay? And people who are using cocaine, people using Crossroads and speed and what have you.
Red Bull these days, they got energy drinks. Oh, that stuff is...
Monster. I don't know how people can drink that stuff. And yeah, it has a kick in it, I'm told. You need to be very careful about what we're taking in. And it does have a lot of impact on your quality of life. It really, really does. You need to be quite careful about maintaining good sleep. And that goes along with structure and how you set your day as well. Very, very important. So how do we get good sleep? Well, establish a good nighttime routine. That means that you go to bed at the same time pretty much every night, within a half hour, an hour, okay? Okay, real important. You don't go and have your dinner, although it's very, very different in Europe. I was in Europe in August, in Switzerland and Italy, in Germany with my son, and you know this, if you're in Italy, they take a siesta. Everything shuts down around 2 o'clock. Has anybody been into Europe and experienced this? Yeah. They take a siesta. None of the shops are open or anything like that at that time. And then they get up. And you know what time they have their dinner? At 8 o'clock. You know what time people go out to eat to a restaurant? At about 9 o'clock. So they've kind of skewed, if you will, their sleep-wake cycle and in terms of digesting food, because remember, where's all that blood going to if you've just had a full meal? Going right here to kind of help metabolize that. And where's it taking that blood away from? The brain. And depending on what you eat too, I'll just say this quickly. If you haven't noticed, I go off on tangents. It's just the way my brain works. The popcorn's going, like that. But think about this. If I have sugar problems, okay? If I have sugar problems, diabetes, and my body doesn't process, okay, food well, okay? And say I'm eating and snacking in the evening, and say I don't even have diabetes, but say I'm eating late all the time, well, what happens is your glucose level's going to go up, isn't it? And at some point in time, what's going to happen? Do you think that might have any impact on your sleep cycle? Sure, it's a biological process that's happening. So it isn't just what you eat and when you eat, but there's changes in your blood sugars, And you talk to a diabetic, and you can ask them in terms of if their sugars are too high, they feel very fatigued, very tired, they want to sleep. Exercise is very, very important. And let's not exercise kind of after 7 o'clock, okay? Because you're doing a lot of contraction and expansion of your muscles and what have you. And, the lactic acid that builds up as well, is going to go against you getting to sleep. Oh, look at this.
Oh, man.
How many people have one of these next to their bedstand? Go ahead, raise your hands. The virtual people won't know. Whoa. Always got to be available.
It lives in the kitchen.
There's only one person that needs to be available, and that's God and the Lord. He's the only one that needs to be available at all times. And he's told us we need to sleep. Okay? And these type of things, and I'm not making any judgment, but I turn these off. They're not even upstairs in my bedroom. I have nothing to do with them at all. And think about think about what's coming into here. Light, entering your pupil, what have you, and you're getting ready to go to bed. So this here is, you really need to get a hold of that. And I said this last night, and that is that you are what you eat. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you think you are what you hear? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, you are. Do you think you are what you see? And I never got into videos on that generation and what have you. I've just, thankfully, but the things that people watch on their videos, these violent games that they're playing, that, as I told you last night, that's impacting the brain, whether you are having a sympathetic response where your heart gets going or you're shallow breathing or anything like that. Even if you're not having that, doesn't mean it's not impacting your brain. Don't let anybody kid you. I believe the level of violence that we're seeing, one of the variables is the very violent videos that are going on. And you'll hear, the manufacturers of all this in Hollywood and everything say, no, that's not true. It doesn't make sense. When we send somebody to get an EEG and we want to find out if they have seizures, you know what we do? Or what they do? They use strobe lights. And why they do strobe lights? To enter light into the eye to see if they can elicit a seizure. And so you can't tell me that watching all this violent stuff is not impacting your brain. It is. It truly is. Limiting caffeine, go to bed at the same time, And we talked about this a lot. Reducing stress. Inflammation, and there are so many ways to do that. Just meditating, taking a scripture, memorizing that, and just, letting the Holy Spirit talk to you to impact your mind about what God is relaying, what He is sharing with you. You can meditate. You can do a stretching. You can do a very light stretching. A lot of people will listen to very soothing type of waterfalls. I did get a little waterfall thing that I have in my porch during the summertime, and I'll go out there with a nice mint tea and just listen to the water going, and it's very calming, isn't it? Isn't it very calming? Going next to a stream and hearing the water over, if you will, the rocks and what have you. So you can develop sleep hygiene practices, and I'm going to give you a handout for that, but also I'm going to give you a nice nighttime sleep log. You can make copies of it. I got it on the internet. It's not copyrighted. And you could just check your sleep, log your sleep, and see, okay, maybe you're getting good sleep, but maybe there's things you can do to tweak that to get better sleep, Okay, so that'll be a handout that I will pass out tonight. Okay, so I got this slide twice up there, so we'll just use this one here. And it can create a lot of problems. As I told you, I look at initial insomnia, mid-insomnia, and then what we call terminal late insomnia as well. And people are very fatigued, concentration problems and what have you. Performance goes off. It affects your mood, if you will. Daytime sleepiness can affect your frontal lobes, so that, I call these the brakes. These are the brakes. They filter and they say, "Oops, Jim, that's inappropriate to think. That's inappropriate to say." And we put if you will, the brakes on that. And when you're not sleeping, you're not on your game, you're not focused, you're not attending to that, and you may say things that you don't mean to say, and you're not intentionally saying it, but because of lack of sleep, you kind of really get yourself into some possible problems. Then there's, the idea of having motivation and what have you. And we classify it. We look at, if we're looking at a diagnosis of some type of sleep disorder, we'll look at, the frequency, how long it happens, and then doing any sleep study. And there's other things they can do as well. And we do look for underlying causes that might be contributing to people's sleep. And there can be many causes. Somebody could have a very small tumor in the pituitary area of their brain. Okay, so some treatment approaches to that. We're going to talk about some of those tonight and tomorrow night. And just look at the various things that can happen. We already talked about caffeine, and last night I talked about cannabis, pot withdrawal. You do have a withdrawal from marijuana, cannabinoids. You do, okay? And we do, I have to tell you, we have cannabinoid receptors in our brain that the good Lord put there. And I'm not saying we should be taking cannabinoids, marijuana, but we have endocannabinoids in our brain receptors. Very, very interesting. I'd like to be able to talk with him someday to find out what were they in there for? What were you? What should we be taking to use that, if you will? But yes, where are we here? Marijuana, cannabis withdrawal. People are smoking, and I always ask them, "Do you smoke marijuana?" And do you know how many people tell me they're smoking marijuana to go to sleep and they smoke daily? I would say about anybody that's under 60 years old, about 85% of people smoke cannabinoids. Yeah, they smoke cannabinoids. And a lot of people do it to help with sleep because it calms them down, but over the long run, it has some ill effects. Certainly opioid addictions and what have you. Did you ever think about this? Nicotine withdrawal? That's going to affect insomnia. When I ever talk with people about coming off of nicotine, I say, gee, you should talk to your PCP. But just like any drug, okay, even sugar, you got to taper it in a very methodical way. You can't just, stop all of a sudden, unless maybe there is some reason for that. But acute stress, clearly, sleeping is a problem. We see this in post-traumatic stress disorder. I did my thesis work with Vietnam vets that came back from Nam who were in, firefights, combat situations, and what have you. And that was one of the major target symptoms they had was problems with sleep, especially waking up at nighttime. Remember what I said about our dream state is what? It's what we experience during the daytime. Well, can you imagine, Greg, if your body has been very hypervigilant and you don't know who the enemy is? Is it this lady who has a basket of rice on top of her head and she's walking by you, but she has a bomb on her? You don't know who the enemy is. And so you're in this hyper-vigilant state. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks out all these hormones. And so you're ready, you're looking like this. And I'll talk with non-vets, and they hear a chopper. Guess what? Something's got, just sound like that, And I'll just say this, and here's a little tangent, if you'll allow me to do that. And hear what I'm going to say. We're finding very small, titrated doses in clinical situations. More, it's on research right now at Oxford University in England and Johns Hopkins, of using LSD, lysergic acid, as a way of reframing how they experience that trauma in their brain. And it's working, okay? But they're getting therapy. It's in a very controlled setting. There's real controls so that they're not going to have visual hallucinations, not going to mess up their whole brainstem and what have you, but they're finding some efficacy and help with that as well. Okay, so this is a diary, sleep day diary, a sleep diary, a night and daytime that I'm going to give to you. And I'd encourage you can make copies of it. It's not, as I said, it's not copyrighted. And, you know, it's pretty simple. Day one, did you take a nap? I have to confess to you, I had to take a nap today. I got home very late and then I had a full case of patients today. And I was just so exhausted. So I took a little nap, okay? But I put my alarm on and I said, you're only gonna sleep for this. And it just gave me a little boost. But you gotta be careful about naps, okay? You know, because if you're napping over here, you know, it's gonna be stealing from over here, you know? That's what happens. So I'm not saying not to take a nap, but really measure that and limit it, if you will, to that. But it's pretty simple log that you can do, whether you're having any caffeinated beverages, the number of drinks you have. And so maybe you're drinking coffee here, and you could say, well, gee, I'm going to try to just eliminate this, and I'm only going to have one here. And then over several weeks, I'm going to mix this with decaf coffee. You know, I'm going to do half and half, okay? Again, people come to me and they say, Jim, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. Can I have some medications? And I go over all these things with them. And I say, how can I give you some medication when all of these things are contributing factors for you not sleeping? You see the problem? You know? And when I had 4 prisons that I was in a contract with the Department of Corrections here in Vermont, that's what the inmates would tell me. They said, Jim, I need something to sleep. Oh, okay. So I tell the CO, the correction officer, I'd like you to monitor their sleep for me for several weeks, okay? And they get that information. And gee, Billy, I noticed that you slept from 12 noon to 5 just before supper time. I said, you know, you've got to change your sleep habits. You have to create more structure. You can't go to this program in the prison. You can do X, Y, and Z and what have you. But there are a lot of things we're doing that interrupt with our sleep. And there are a lot of things that we're not doing that gives us good sleep. So this can be very helpful. You know, medications you use and what have you, how much you exercise. And yes, exercise during the daytime, just a 15-minute walk, just smelling the fresh air and what have you is very, very healthy for you. How many people got out today? How many people stayed out at least 10 or 15 minutes? Good, good, good. Didn't it feel nice? Huh? I was wearing my shorts. It was so warm. No, it wasn't. It was a beautiful day. It was just a gorgeous day, a real indication of what's coming around the corner for us, okay? And, you know, how did that affect your mood when you looked at that? And you can just do that and follow that. It's a real neat log that you can do. And this is your morning. Again, I'm not going to go over this in detail. You get a copy, but it's self-explanatory. Make copies of it. You know, if you're having troubles sleeping that, yeah, use it to see what you might come up with, okay? So we touched on some of these. Set a schedule. Don't force yourself to sleep, you know. If you're not sleeping and you're there and you're tossing over and you're tossing over and you're tossing over, get up, you know, sit in a rocking chair. If it's a pleasant book, you want to read the Psalms, or there's a special poem that you like to read, read something like that. You know, try not to turn the electronics on and what have you. Maybe have a cup of mint tea with a little honey in it, if you will. Again, we talked about this, the napping, and your bed is for sleep and for intimacy, isn't it? That's what your bed is for, sleep and intimacy. I won't ask you if you have a TV in your room, bedroom. No TVs in bedrooms, and these in computers, avoid any of those electronics, if you will. Exercise and eat well, and sleep in a comfortable environment. If your room's too hot, maybe you need it because you might be more mature and you're losing your adipose tissue, your tissue that insulates us, and maybe you need something warmer. But I find if my room's too warm, I don't sleep as well. So I lower the temperature upstairs in my second floor. So, create some comfort, if you will. What I also do, and we'll talk a little about this, I think, tomorrow. I don't know if we'll get to it today. Cindy had brought it up about essential oils. I put lavender on my pillowcase, a pure essential oil lavender. Really nice. So there's things you can do to, adjust your environment, if you will, so to help you sleep. Okay. Any questions about that? Any thoughts? Yes.
How do you feel about those noise, or those, like, people put on white noise?
Yeah.
Or
Noisemakers.
soothing sounds? Or,
Yeah.
Is that, I've heard different things.
Yeah. I think you have to try it out, experiment with it to see how it impacts you. But I know my son-in-law, when they come to visit, I have to pull a fan out in the middle of the winter because he likes that white noise. And, his shift a little schedule is skewed, if you will. But yeah, experiment with that and see what works for you versus what does not work for you.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, not at all. Do you use any sounds like that?
I have in the past, but then I've heard that they're not so.
And then, I mean, even though your brain is kind of going offline, that doesn't mean your hearing is offline. That doesn't mean your breathing is fully offline or your any senses are offline. Your vision's not offline, is it? Why? You see in your dreams. You see in your dreams. Yeah. I just want to mention one thing. It came to mind as you were just sharing. What's your first name again? Dina. Okay. And that is the problem we have with our industrial society is we have night shift. I remember, when I was earning my stripes, I had to work in the ER and do consultations in the ER for the night shift. And by 4 o'clock in the morning, it was like, and somebody would wake up and say, "You got a consult, Jim." And I wake up, I'm drooling, and my face has the marks of the of the thing here in it, and my brain goes off. Why? And our industrial society kind of goes against how we created, okay? And I know we have needs around people working at nighttime and what have you. Cindy?
I was just going to remark to what Dina said. I've been doing that now. I mean, you can find all kinds of places where there's like a snowstorm, a blizzard or something. You hear the wind and all that, and sometimes windows rattling. And the other night I listened to one that had gentle rain on a tent. And I've also been lulled to sleep by train tracks. The ching, 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 ching. Yeah, it's really pretty soothing for me. I suppose it's, it depends on what you like. Yeah. But it does help me. And if I don't fall asleep right away, like within a half hour or so, I notice it calms me down. I don't feel like I got to get to sleep. It at least calms you down so that you're laying there and you're relaxed. Yeah. Me, anyway, it does.
And what you're also talking about is a preparation, even in terms of telling your mind to your brain, look, I got to begin to slow down here, Yeah. I've got to prepare myself for sleep and not just take it for granted. I'm going to hop in bed and go to sleep,
Yeah.
Good thought, yes. Greg had a question here, Kevin?
Well, I worked night shift for about 30, 40 years, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Like third shift, and second shift was my best working shift.
Yeah.
Because you were awake and everything when you went in. There was no waking up, but socially it wasn't so good.
Oh.
But the third shift, being up all night, I got really used to it. And
I got used to it.
I loved it.
He got used to it.
I loved it.
Your body didn't get used to it.
Yeah, it did.
Your body endured a lot of stress and inflammation. You were going against the whole cortisol levels. You cannot change, Greg, the cortisol levels and when they increase in your body and when they decrease. You can't. Did you like it? Yeah. The bosses weren't around, whatever. There's a lot of reasons why people like it, but still there's a pound of flesh to pay for it. You're not built to, when that sun goes down, that's how your body is. And that doesn't mean to say people don't like it and they get used to it. You have to get used to it.
Well, I think like in the bridge shops where I worked, there was no windows in them, so it was always the same, whether you're in there daytime, nighttime. So all the printing looked the same.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, he needs to use his microphone.
It was
Closer.
like no windows in it, so everybody was working in the same environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So we adjust our environment to tell our brain it's not nighttime. I can't tell if it's nighttime if I can't see the sun out there or the daylight, right? And what do we know about, Kathy, about people who are in ICUs and all the stimuli and what have you? They get very disoriented and they experience a delirium, a psychosis. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts of things that have worked for people? No? Okay. So we're going to talk about an unpleasant situation, suicide. But that's a reality. That's something that I really go into with people when they're depressed, when they're having an adjustment disorder, they're in an acute stressful situation and what have you. And I have had several patients who have completed suicide. When somebody wants to do it, they will do it, okay? But having said that, there's so much before that we can do to intervene, and I'm going to talk about that, okay? But I will say this, okay? And if you remember that first picture that I showed you of the gentleman crouched down, I said they're boxed in. A deep, severe depression is as worse as the most agonizing pain that you have experienced. Yeah, it's agonizing, it's painful, it's horrendous. It's horrendous. And so we accept the idea, and I'm not supporting suicide or euthanasia or anything like that. Please don't take that away. But we accept the idea if you have cancer, that there's a high likelihood you're going to die. You know, some people don't. But there is a high likelihood you're going to die. Or if you have a poor heart, you have congestive heart failure, and you have a major infarction, a major heart attack, that you can die from it. We accept that, don't we? Because those are an outcome of what? Illnesses and diseases. But yet, we say, well, that person took their life. Okay? So I'm just asking you to consider that. Because the family that are left behind in dealing with it it's quite a heavy toll that they experience. So we're going to talk about suicide and start with myths here, okay? So when someone is suicidal, they're always going to be suicidal. That's not true. No. It may be a period of time during a set of circumstances and situations and what have you, okay? That somebody loses their job, you know, their wife is separating from them, the bank is repossessing their car, and their identity is so much tied up in being a father, being a husband, being, you know, a provider and what have you, and they have this surge of inflammation and what have you. Well, if those things are addressed, it doesn't mean that the individual's going to chronically be suicidal. No. So that's a myth. As you can see that, you know, the risk is usually short-term and it's, you know, very specific focus to that set of circumstances, if you will. Okay. Talking about suicide, and I think you all know this, talking about suicide is going to encourage them to act on that. That's not true. That is the biggest myth you can ever say. You know, if you talk about it, if you think about this from a brain, if you're able to articulate thoughts and put them into words, what part of your brain are you using?
Frontal lobe.
Yeah, the frontal lobe and the cortex. And that has brakes on this emotional side of our brain. It can put brakes on that. So if I'm on the phone with somebody and I say, I got a gun to my head, I'm talking to them, saying, don't do it, don't do it. And I'm engaging them, if you will. Front part of the brain, this cortex, acts as a brake to slow down that emotional, if you will, that dysregulation that happens. So this is not true at all in any way. They're determined to die. No, this word is right there, is ambivalence. And ambivalence is kind of, you're on the fence. You know, it's not a done deal. Yes, there are some people that will do it impulsively and what have you, and do it without any planning. And those individuals, you know, there's likely something going on, probably organically in their brain. Maybe they've been using a substance. Maybe the stress is so intense that they can't bear it. But there, whoops, ooh, let me go back there. There's a period of time, and people are contemplating this and what have you, in which there's time to intervene and provide some support in counseling and help. This is not true at all. You know, it's the people who have psychiatric disorders, they're the ones that commit suicide. No, that's not true at all. Anybody can, you know. Just like it's a myth to think that all this violence that's happening, and you hear it on the news, and they're so quick to point out, we've got to get the mentally ill off the streets. They're doing all this and what have you. The studies about that is so untrue, so untrue. And what it does to those who have a psychiatric disorder, it puts a target, it puts a label, puts a stigma on them. So no, this can happen to anybody. I can imagine what happened in 2008 when the stock market crashed, and everybody, you know, was losing everything. We know what happened in the Depression in the 1929 and 1930. You know, I mean, people were taking their lives. People were taking their lives during a very stressful situation. That otherwise, if they didn't have that level of stress going on, you know, life would go on for them, if you will. Most suicides happen suddenly without warning. Nope, a lot of warning signs. We're going to go over them in a minute. You can't hide that unless it's so impulsive, it's so irrational, nothing planned at all. And those are the exception. They do happen. But there are all indicators that somebody is struggling with being alive. We'll go over that, which is a good thing, because those are the places you intervene, you know, and you can help somebody. People who talk about suicide don't mean to do it. Well, what is that myth saying? You're minimizing what they're experiencing, okay? Some do mean to do it, okay? But again, there's ambivalence, there's time for intervention. And does it say, people are experiencing anxiety? Yeah, may feel that there is no hope and what have you, but you know, there are reasons why people are feeling that way and experiencing that way, but as I said, they're quite ambivalent about it. So look at the suicide rates. I got this out of the National Institute of Mental Health, and you know, this is the latest one they had. We don't have one for up to 20, but you can see here, you know, it going up and up and up and up and up. It looks like a little dip there for the past, what, 19, 20 years. The suicide rate's going up. Huh? Pre-pandemic. So we don't have the data. We as a government, or our government has done a terrible job in gathering data for COVID and explaining that, and let alone what are the collateral damage of that. And I could speak 2 hours on that, but I shall not do that. Okay, so here again is that graph, but now it's breaking it down, and these are the total suicides, all of these, in looking at the use of firearms for completed suicides. Now, this is not a statement on owners of guns, okay? It's not we're talking about mental illness, and when you use a gun, you know, there's a greater likelihood of completing suicide. And I have consulted with various people who have been in the hospital, you know, and going down a psych consult on a med-surg floor, and, you know, they've used a gun, put it underneath their chin, and when they go to pull the trigger, it pushes this way, and it just goes and kind of blows off part of their face, and they're alive. Okay? But they intended, the lethality was there as well. Okay? But it makes sense. If you're going to use a firearm, there's a greater likelihood that you will complete that act, if you will. And I put this up here. Intent is, do I intend? What is my intention? Do I really want to die? And I really, you know, after people have come and, you know, they were hospitalized. I'm in outpatient care now, but I do talk with them if they had been hospitalized and about suicide. But I'll ask them, what were you think? What was your hope? What was your intentions? Well, I really didn't want to take my life. I hoping that somebody would have intervened and what have you. And I said, then I'll say to them, do you understand the lethality of what you were using? Some people don't know the lethality, okay? They don't know that using this certain type of antidepressants, okay, can affect the cardiac conduction, and whether you not intended to die, you get a beat in there and bang, you get an arrhythmia, and you're. In my early career at Worcester Memorial, I think I mentioned that last night, Belmont Street in Worcester, I distinctly remember a female, she was in her mid-30s and had taken, I don't know, Elavil, I can't remember, one of the tricyclics. But it was one of the old antidepressants that we still use, I still use, and what have you. And she's walking down the hallway. I mean, she's on the psych floor now. She's walking down the hallway, and all of a sudden, she drops. She never told us she had taken an overdose of tricyclics. And guess what it did? Put a beat, you know, well, we're right there, you know. Got her down, and she got resuscitated and what have you. But some people don't know the lethality. And people who struggle with suicide and the ambivalence and what have you, and they'll take an overdose of Tylenol or an aspirin. Cumulatively, they've done it time again and time again. They don't know the lethality and the damage they're doing to their liver in terms of processing those type of medications, you know, and the damage that can be done. You know, so there's a difference between somebody intending, I want to take my life. I haven't written a note. We'll talk about all those things. I haven't done this and this and this, and I'm going to use a gun. They're very high risk, very, very high risk, and what have you. So we try to differentiate, you know, this, and I just put that up there, that there is a difference between one's intentions and the means they use, if you will. So here we go. Again, 2019, this is from SAMHSA. Here we had about 20 million people, okay, who had serious thoughts of suicide, okay? And out of that 12 million, people made plans. Okay, so you can see it's advancing, progressing in terms of people's intentions and setting themselves up, if you will. And then out of those, 1.4 million actually followed through with their plan. Okay, you're following this here? And then out of that 1.4 million, 1.2 million, okay, they made plans and attempted suicide, but they didn't complete suicide, thankfully. Okay? Thankfully, they didn't complete suicide. And then out of that 1.4 million, 217,000, no plans, impulsive, they attempted suicide, and they completed their suicide, if you will. Okay? So here we go, looking at males and females and breaking it down in race. This is American Indian. This is Asians, and I'm not quite sure what that PL is there. Blacks, whites, Hispanics. And you can see in terms of looking at males and females, you can see that in terms of the American Indians, and we know this on the reservations, there's a high rate of suicide. And so this is per 100,000. So look at this. This is 44 and a half people per 100,000 Indians, American Indians, commit suicide. That's notable, okay? Quite notable. And you can see males is always greater than the females in both races, if you will. But here we are, Caucasians, males, 30%, females, 8%. So 38%, 38, not percent, 38 per 100,000 are...
That PL is a PI,
Is it a PI?
Pacific Islanders.
Ah, thank you.
Pacific Islanders.
Okay, I only have my glasses here. And then this is according to by age, okay? So here we have the, again, female, we have male, and then we have the ages, 10 to 14, 15 to 24, 25, 44, da-da. And so as you look at this, suicide rates per 100,000, this is such an interesting one when you look at it. 15 to 44, that's pretty much the prime of life, isn't it? When you add that up. So here we go, we add that up and we get, here we go, Jim, yes, here we go. We get 35 and a half, we've got 41, and then we got 41, and that is 63. 63 per 100,000. That's real concerning. And that's 2019, as Kathy had pointed out. We have nothing. We haven't looked at the data yet, or I don't know what the data is yet for what's happening in COVID. When you think of addictions, abuse that's going on, kids not going to school, people losing their jobs, losing their homes. I mean, remember last night we looked at all those stressors, if you will. And then you can see, again, it's broken down into ages, if you will. I'll skip that one. So this is an interesting one in looking at the ranking of suicides, okay? And look at this. For this age group, it's the second highest reason why youth in this age group die. Look at this, second in this age group. Second in this age group. It's the second biggest reason why people take their life in these age groups. Okay. So this makes more sense, doesn't it? Where there are more guns, there are more suicides. Again, this is not a, I have no, nothing against owning guns at all. Guns are harmless. Certainly you have to get training on them, what have you. But it's not the gun issue, okay? It's the individual who might be suffering psychiatric disorder and what have you. So I'm not going to tackle it from that angle, and I don't want you to think that I'm against guns or I'm, lobbying, let's get rid of guns. No, that's not the case here. I'm just pointing out, if there is guns in the home, it's a 3 times higher risk. Okay, if somebody is thinking about suicide, they have the means to do it, huh? And it's one of the things I always will, if I get a patient coming crisis that I'm treating and, we're able to create a crisis plan or what have you, and that's one of the first things I want to know. Are there guns in the home? What are we going to do with the guns? What are we going to do with the guns? Okay? And they will not leave my office till that's part of the treatment plan, that they're safely placed away. And look at this. Adults in households with firearms are not more depressed or suicidal, yet they're far more likely to die by suicide, okay? That's if you're suffering and you're under a high stressful situation. And this basically points out, here we go, 96, this is our population. Let's say it's 270 million people, and we could see we had less guns than people. Come up to 2013, this is our population, and look at our availability of guns. Very interesting. And this breaks down, I don't have a lot of time to talk about it, people who own guns, people who don't own guns, but know somebody that does. And they broke this down, and this again was for, 2013, broke it down into individuals according to gender, according to their race, according to where they live in the country, and what type of population they live in, whether they live in an urban, whether they live in suburban. And look at the rural people. That would be who? Us. That would be us, huh? When I first came to Vermont, my wife and I, some 35 years ago, and we went to go build our house, 2 or 3 years into being here, and we were building it during the fall time, and hunting season came, and the sheetrockers were nowhere around to be found. It's hunting season. Here's a kid growing up outside of Boston. How did I know that? It's hunting season. How dare you go build a house during hunting season, Jim?
You build a house, you just don't expect the sheetrockers to show up.
You're all smiling. You're all chuckling, huh? Yeah. So there's that Flatlander. We got him. Okay. Whoops. What happened there?
There you go.
Okay. Sorry. So lethality. 85-90% of people who use a gun, attempt suicide, die. Okay? So, there's no getting around the lethality of using a gun. Okay? And counseling may affect home stories. Why I put this up here is that this should be part of every emergency room training for nurses and doctors, okay? Not only finding out whether they have a gun and what have you, and being able to know how that can be now safely stored, if you will, and get out of the home. But notice this, less than 50% of suicidal patients have documented counseling about this. You don't cover that. That's a lot of liability. That hospital will have a lot of liability, if you will. And that individual certainly is at a much higher risk. Okay, so here it kind of breaks down, and it's by the CDC 2019, so these are fairly new statistics, okay? And so you look at 47,511. As you can see, firearms, which is, let's see, half of that would be, so this is almost 50%, eh? Okay. Suffocation. Do you know what that is? Hanging. Carbon monoxide. Huh? And people, as I told you, people plan. They'll go on Google, and how do you use carbon monoxide? taping the windows, making sure that, you seal the exhaust from the pipe into your car, taping the windows, and getting a brick and putting a brick on the gas pedal. Because guess what happens as you begin to take in carbon monoxide? Yeah. And I had this happen over in Maine when I was working at a psych unit. This is the first patient I had knew that had taken their life by that, and she was a female. She had schizophrenia. Her parents were well off. She lacked for nothing, but she couldn't live with this disease, and that's what she did. She completed her act of suicide. Poisoning, okay. There's a lot of other reasons why people can, or other means by which people will do that, okay. And here it breaks down this according to gender. And you can see males use what? Firearms more than females. But this is a very surprising number for me. Generally, females will use a lot of poisoning, okay, or slashing their wrist, if you will. But men use guns pretty much, and there's poisoning, and then there's others as well. So the idea that there is time, that the person is ambivalent, and what are some of the characteristics in which they may be expressing that verbally or in terms of their behaviors and their actions, They talk about wanting to die, and there's a difference between passive and active, okay? When I'm talking with somebody, because some people do have chronic passive thoughts about it, but don't act on it. Now, if they shift into something that's more active, I've got to pay attention, if you will. Feeling empty and hopeless, if you will, trapped, feeling unbearable physical pain or emotional pain, if you will. I'm a burden to other people, I've had financial situations. I can't keep having my parents help me out. I'm an adult, Withdrawal is a major thing. Giving away important possessions. Saying goodbye, Putting affairs in order, your will and what have you, making sure everything is organized. Taking greater risk. I had a patient that would, she was, how shall I say, she was cautious enough in doing this that she would drive down 89. She would make sure there was no cars behind her or no cars in front of her, and she would close her eyes and count for how long she could close her eyes and stay on the road. Pretty scary, huh? Pretty scary. Yeah. So taking risk, and what have you, thinking about it often, if you will. Then you can look at, are there mood swings in there? Are they planning, looking at that, searching about that? What does this do to the front part of the brain? It takes it offline. If you're drinking, and you're intoxicated, you're kind of lubricated and you're high and what have you, and those brakes aren't gonna work, your ability to discern and problem solve, and with alcohol and that. Sleeping, changing, becoming more rageful. This is the take home. Suicidal thoughts or actions are extreme of distress and should not be ignored. Prognosis, pretty good prognosis. Only 10% of people with suicidal thoughts or behaviors later die by suicide. So that means there's what? 90% of people who, if attempted, have troubles with this and what have you, that you can help, okay? So there is hope here. Okay, I'm going to get into that. And what do patients want? You know, you have to be straightforward with them. You know, it's centered around them. It has to be individualized. And this is very important, you know, advise, but not lecturing, and being knowledgeable. And it's okay to talk about suicides and their thoughts about how they're going to do it, especially the use of weapons. And so a crisis response plan, and we do this when I was working in inpatient psychiatry and do it in outpatient psychiatry as well, and should be a part of when people come to the ER and then been discharged home. You know, it's a memory aid, okay? It's a toolbox, if you will, in which they'll have strategies, you know, to follow if they're becoming overwhelmed, okay? I'm going to call this crisis line. I'm going to call my grandfather. I have my neighbor who's next to me. I'm going to call my therapist, my doctor. I'm going to go to the ER, okay? That it's basically a crisis plan, how it's a toolbox that when you're kind of overwhelmed emotionally and this is shutting down, you can refer to that. It's a treatment plan. And pretty much I can tell you that when I was overseeing as director at the psych unit at CVMC, the nursing staff, that was part of the treatment plan always, was to develop a crisis plan for the patient. Okay. And it consists of, you know, a number of things I've talked about. But yeah, what are the warning signs? What are the cues that things are not going well? The management strategies, you know, and I always want to know what prevented you from acting on this. It was pretty intentional. As you were really at the point of taking your life. Well, I thought about my kids, you know. What are the things that are anchors for them, you know? I had this experience, I had that experience. What is holding them? What is giving them meaning and purpose for life? And as you said, we talked about socialization, and you withdraw when you're thinking about taking your life. Social supports, you know, emergency steps and what have you. But developing a crisis plan is so important. And remember I was telling you about when people are in, especially in a ER being evaluated and what have you for suicide, this basically points out the primary areas where it can be stored. You can call the local authorities, the police, to store a weapon. A gun shop, there are a number of gun shops available in our counties, are they not? And then I don't know if we have pawn shops. I'm not aware of any armories, but I will talk with families about storage sites that they might have, you know. And by the way, I mean, I'm sure they teach this in people learning to use weapons, that, you know, you store the guns in a locked, you know, safe, and the bullet should be separate from that as well. And there's ways to deal with that. There are issues about liability while storing, and if I return that, am I going to be held liable, you know? But I can't speak to that, but I would think that the police would want some reassurance that this patient is stable before returning a weapon, if you will. So this is very interesting, and I know it's a little outdated, but in Sri Lanka, look at this. The number one way of people taking their lives was pesticides. And look at this. What they do, they banned toxic pesticides in their environment. And look at, there was a 50% drop in suicide rates. Look at this in England, okay? Number one way of people taking their life was gas. What did they do? I didn't know this, that, Kevin, you working with Irving? I didn't know that you can change gas to a non-toxic compound. But the suicide rates dropped 33%. And this makes sense here. You know, in the Israeli military, they were taking weapons home and what have you. And what they decided to do was to say, oh, you can't take your weapons home. You have to leave them on the base. Both genders, females and males, at a certain age, you have to, there's a mandatory service in Israel in the army. And so they said, well, you can't take your guns at home. And there was a drop in that, just by that intervention, you know. So if you think about that, interventions work when people are struggling around suicide. So this will be a handout tonight that I'll give you, you know, suicide prevention hotline, crisis text hotline, and our veterans are hurting. They're really hurting. They're really, really hurting.
And the VA is making great strides.
Yes.
In that. They are,
good point, John.
They are busting themselves to try and
Yeah.
close the gap.
Yeah, yeah. No, they are on board in terms of helping and providing the services. They will reach out at all costs. There will be no stone unturned with the veterans. And these are some of the additional resources, but more importantly, we're in Washington County. Washington County Mental Health has a crisis team, 24/7. You can call them at 3 o'clock in the morning at this number, and they will be there for you, and they'll even come to your home. They come into the field. Okay, that is part of their mandate. That's how they get their funding from the state legislature. That is part of their mandate, their functional role. Same thing with Clara Martin Center, Orange County. Okay, I'll give you this handout as well. And veteran hotline. Okay. Now there's Lamoille County. I could have put it that. There's Chittenden County, you know, and you know, there's so many. I don't know how many counties there are here in Vermont. But each county has a mental health center that has a crisis team that is there and available for emergencies. Okay. Any questions about that?
You do have a handout.
Yes. Yes, I do have a handout. Good. Okay. We're going to go over medications, and then we're going to stop there because it's like almost 8 o'clock, and I'll you know, won't weary you and or weary myself like I did last night. You guys should have stopped me. Someone, hey, Jim, you're talking too much. Again, I'm going to say that, okay. Yes, you're welcome. We'll be here tomorrow again. Medications, as you've heard me say multiple times, is only one slice of the pie, but I do need to cover it, and I'll cover this in a very general, broad way. Trust me, it's a very complex process, and here are these beautiful neurons that talk to each other. This is a literal picture. Okay, that's a little.
That's your whole set right there. Starting box and do the next.
So let's just look at one neuron. You don't have to memorize this, but this is the nucleus. And remember I was showing you last night the dendrites and the mice, and you know that were learned helplessness, and they were doing things to these mice, and the dendrites were the density wasn't there at all. Then they gave them this thing called interleukin 10, which is an anti-inflammatory compound. But anyhow, these are the dendrites. All messages come in to this nucleus, okay? Messages come, and they go out. An electronic message goes out, firing, and at the end of this axon, okay, there's these, if you will, vesicles, okay, that release all these things called neurotransmitters. And this is happening at a millionth of a second, okay, where, you know, there's an incoming message, it's processed, it's sent down through the axon, then it's communicated. So it's an electrical, if you will, and a neurotransmitter, a compound doing that. That's a very simple explanation I'm sharing with you. It is much, much more intense than that. And I think there's probably about, this one neuron has probably about 10 million other neurons connecting to it. Think about that. How beautifully we're made that how do you process all that information? And you're going to tell me these computers are much greater, artificial intelligence is going to surpass what the Creator has made? No way. Won't happen. How do you think they created computers and what have you? They studied the brain. We're just beautifully and wonderfully made. And here is a nice picture, colorful picture. We have to have them all the time, huh? And you see, this is the axon, and we see these vesicles release a compound, a serotonin. It attaches. Then once it's attached, that compound, it goes back up and it goes back in. It's recycled, put into these vesicles. And where we target our antidepressant medications, right in between, John, we call them reuptake inhibitors. We prevent these compounds, these neurotransmitters, from going back. And one of the underlying theories, it's much more complicated than that, we're discovering, but one of the underlying theories is there's not enough of these neurotransmitters that are lacking in people's brains that are depressed. And, okay, I won't get into that too much. And it takes a while for them to work. You want them to work right away, they won't. I look for a response, a marginal response, 2 to 3 weeks. There's a process that has to take place. It's called downregulation. Okay, and I'm not going to get into that, but your body compensates. Your body compensates when you're depressed and you don't have enough of these compounds for synapsing. It compensates by growing more these receptor sites called autoreceptor sites, and they are for receiving messages, but this is where the complication part comes in. They also, they're called autoreceptors, they're brakes. And when they form, it's preventing. Okay? It's called downregulation. Don't worry about it. But it takes time, and that's kind of the science behind it, if you will. And this is a whole list of medications that I put here. MAO inhibitors, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, such as Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa, Zoloft. Then these are the tricyclics I told you about, amitriptyline, nortriptyline, and what have you, that can really affect the heart conduction, Wellbutrin, what have you. I need to back up here for a minute. These are not limited, but these are the 3 major neurotransmitters we look at: serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. And all of them affect mood and cognition, but I will, depending on the person's presentation, if they're more anxious and they have compulsions and what have you, and an underlying depression, they may have a combination, or they may have OCD, I'll use a serotonin agent. I have a patient that I just saw yesterday who has obsessive compulsive disorder. And I'm using an agent with therapy, with exposure response to the things she obsesses about and is compulsive about. And she's doing quite well now, really quite well. And so we'll use different ones. Then there's some that is a combination of both this and this, okay? We'll use it based on the presentation. So say if somebody, I see this, I call it more of an apathy syndrome, that they're apathetic, and you say, oh, they're depressed. But But they tell me, I have no energy, Jim. I have no drive. I have no motivation, no initiative. I'll use something that's a little more activating, like dopamine, okay? So the basic take-home message here is that not all the antidepressants are the same. So we use different antidepressants for different presentations of target symptoms, and we also consider side effects as well, okay? Yeah.
Go back to the last slide,
Yes, that one or that one?
the one that had the medications listed.
Oh, okay. Oh, here we go. There we go.
What does weighted rating mean?
It's just in terms of their usefulness, if you will. I put that up there, but I wouldn't worry about that at all. The thing that's more concerning, Cindy, is say if I have somebody on Zoloft, sertraline, and it's not working, okay, and we've given it a good therapeutic trial, and I'm going to switch them to a different I'm going to switch them to Remeron, I need to look at equivalency doses so that when I'm tapering one and increasing another, I can do that in a gradual way. But how much is, well, I know that, here we go, I'll give you an example. Celexa citalopram and its sister, Lexapro escitalopram. Lexapro is 2 times stronger than Celexa. So I know if I'm going from Lexapro to Celexa, I have to adjust the dose accordingly because I'm going from a more powerful, if you will, concentrated, if I could use that term, to a lower concentrated. That's primarily the real the approaches and what I wouldn't worry about the weighted rating. But there are many different kinds. The thing about antidepressants, they do have side effects. Too much sun, too much water, too much salt, too much of anything. There's the pluses and minuses to everything. There are concerns around weight regarding certain medications, cardiac in terms of certain medications that I have to understand. Do they have, congestive heart failure? They're on heart meds and what have you. Have they had a heart block? I need to know that because there are certain medications that I won't use. Then there's these sexual side effects that both male and females can have, and that can really affect a relationship. Then there's all these neurological central nervous system ones as well, from headaches. I had a patient today that I'm treating and came and was telling me she was having headaches, but as we looked into that, she was having these headaches because she was doing certain exercises. And I said, let's bird dog that for the next 2 weeks. And you need to change doing this in your exercise routine and see if that will change your headaches, and hopefully it will. But yeah, tiredness, sedation, lightheadedness, and we have to be careful when we're working with those who are elderly, in terms of gait and balance and what have you. And we're considering all of this. And this is a typical one, that people will have, nausea and what have you. And then there's some of these, depending on the certain medications, that you have dry mouth, constipation, blurred vision. There are a certain category of meds and what have you. I'll say this about side effects. I tell them, I said, these are potential side effects. I said, when you go to get the thing out of the box, you got a roll of toilet paper of side effects, okay? And so what I tell them is, I said, these are the ones that I know in clinical practice that are going to be more prone. It doesn't mean some of these other ones couldn't happen, but I don't want you to read into it when you read all of these here, okay? Don't go and read, I'm going to have this and this and this. And someone who has a somatic general anxiety will tend to do that. But anyhow, a lot of them are transient. They don't last long, I said. If they're persistent and what have you, then we have to do something about that and look at a different category and what have you. But they're transient. They're not going to persist time and time again. And this is a nice little thing. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but it really tells me in a different way that, if this one has antihistamine antagonism, I know that they're going to experience weight gain, drowsiness, and what have you. And I'll let them know that. So that I know, depending on where that compound is targeting, if you will, receptors, I know what type of side effects potentially they can have and what have you. And so, yeah, there's side effects to these. They're not a panacea. They are just not a panacea. So just, and we're almost done here. In closing, just don't stop taking your medications. Like somebody, will say, I just stopped taking my Zoloft, my sertraline. And they'll have a serotonin withdrawal syndrome. Sertraline targets serotonin as a transmitter. And all of a sudden you drop it off. You feel like a Mack truck hits you. You have nausea, headache, flu, aches, pains, dizziness, upset stomach. You feel terrible. You feel terrible. I remember a patient who, in prison over at the Marble Valley, came in, Jim, you got to see this patient. I said, okay, I'll go see him and what have you. And he hadn't been on his Effexor for like 5 days. And he was having seemingly electrical shocks in his body. Yeah. He was having a serotonin withdrawal syndrome. I said, ooh, we got to get him back on this stuff really quickly. Why didn't he get his medication and what have you? It was an initial consult for me. But yeah, you just can't stop him. And really, don't play doctor. If you're having problems, call he or she up and say, hey, I'm having this side effect. Can you help me? Da-da-da-da-da. Versus you don't take it and you have a follow-up appointment in 3 weeks and you stop it and then you tell them, the doctor, and you say, I stopped taking this medication. Oh, thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. That's what I say. I said, where'd you get your MD? Where'd you go get your training? Okay, record side effects, okay? Track your symptoms. As I told you last night, I try to list out 3 major symptoms that we're going to monitor and measure to see if this is going to help, okay? And being careful to combine. And people say, this is just an herb, and I'm just going to take this with this medication. Herbs have an impact, okay? St. John's wort, okay? Oh, my. I ate a lot of grapefruit juice. I've been on this certain diet that tells me to eat a lot of grapefruit juice. It interacts with a number of medications. And, carry a record with you. You can get them from your doctors so that should you go into the hospital for some other reason, you can refer to that list that you have, okay? And so real quick with the 5 hours, I look for a response 2 to 3 weeks, and I'm not looking for a huge response. Generally speaking, I let people know you got to hang in there with me for a good 8 to 12 weeks, okay? And these things will begin to really have a robust response, but you got to hang in there. And then we'll see a remission, and it's usually longer than 2 months, that begins to come in. And then recovery is clearly 12 to 18 months where they are very, very stable. But people can relapse for a number of reasons. These antidepressants, can poop out, if you will. And there isn't a recurrence that happens anyhow with certain depressions and what have you. And we'll stop there and we'll pick this up tomorrow. Questions?
Is it bad to be on the same medication for years and years, or should it be reevaluated and be changed to something different? Or only if it,
Deanna.
Versus keeping it the same.
Yeah, Deanna, the way I go is let lying dogs sleep. If it's working, why change it? We've had these antidepressants since, 1950 something? I mean, we've had it now 70 years. The long-term effects of them are not notable at all. Even on the fetus and the infant growing in the mom's womb, okay? There are certain medications I will use. There's certain medications I won't use. antidepressants and what have you, but no, there's no need to do that, okay? However, I'll say this, and here we get into a lot of strategies that I use. Let's say if I get the patient is on, let's say, Zoloft or Celexa, and they're doing well. They've been on it 12 weeks, and the anxiety's down, they can drive, and they got all this stuff going on. But they're saying, I'm having problems with my libido. What I will have to do is add something to target that, instead of saying, well, let's just take you off that. And I don't like doing that, John. I don't like doing that. I don't want to chase the wind, but that goes back to the idea that there are side effects to these medications. You can't get away from that.
But they wouldn't show up years later, like.
No, generally speaking.
If you started sweating or having those types of things, it would be something.
Well, you never rule that out, I had a patient on Tuesday who's been on Cymbalta, duloxetine, and it's working, and it's very helpful. I don't have a high dose. And she's been on it now for almost 2 years, and she's never complained to me about sweating at nighttime. And all of a sudden she says, yeah, I have sweating problems. And she's been on it almost 2 years. I said, the likelihood, all things considered, where you've not had any changes with other additional medications that might be contributing to it, I said, it's likely the Cymbalta. I says, let's log that. Let's see how that's doing. You might make some adjustments in your sleeping environment, what have you, but it works, so not quickly to jump it. But yeah, you could have a side effect that pops up, or say somebody, these SSRIs like Zoloft and Prozac, say you begin to develop some type of unknown bleeding disorder, and you tell me that and what have you, and you're on Zoloft or this, then I have to then educate you, and I'll want to monitor your bleeding time. I want to monitor your CBCs, because some of these can affect bleeding times. Some of these can affect sodium and what have you. So in terms of that, if somebody's been on a medication that's been working, then they have some medical condition that they're now being treated for, the other provider needs to be able to be aware that they're on this medication if they go to do that, just as I need to be aware of, if I'm going to put this person on this medication, they have these kind of medical illnesses and these medications that may be drug-to-drug interaction. Did that answer your question? Okay, good. Any other closing thoughts? No. So tomorrow we're going to talk a lot about the complementary alternative ways of addressing mental health, and specifically depression, sleep, and what have you. And so before you go, I do, maybe Pastor, you could help me hand these out. There's a questionnaire on, we'll hold that one for tomorrow. There's a handout for sleep hygiene, and remember I told you it has that sleeping log. This one is on resources. And I want you to do the self-care assessment, bring it in tomorrow, and I'm not going to have you disclose anything, but it's a nice self-care assessment to look at your day and what you do in terms of eat, in terms of how you handle stress. It's a nice assessment, and so it'll help you to kind of look at your lifestyle, and we'll be able to apply some of the things that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. And so do that, and we'll pick it up tomorrow. And some very interesting kind of exercises I'd like to do tomorrow if we have enough people here. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, John.
Yes.
Hey, what does eat regularly mean?
What's that?
Eat regularly.
Yeah.